All right, let's go ahead and continue our discussion of how we make decisions during the staffing process by examining issues around adverse impact and utility in our selection system. So first, let's look again at adverse impact. And if you recall, adverse impact is this situation where your selection tool has some negative impact on a protected class as defined by the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and its subsequent amendments. So this gets to be, sometimes an emotional issue, a political issue, but it really doesn't need to be in my estimation. So you might say, hey, I've got a really good predictor. It's got high validity. It's got high reliability. I really want to use this. I think I can get the best quality candidates. But when you look at the numbers, it's like, but there's an adverse impact implication. Does that mean I've got to settle for poor quality candidates because, you know, the protected class, the minorities, just aren't up to snuff on that? Absolutely not. And let me just give you an example of that. So let's just say you're sourcing from an academic university that has a high minority population, and you find out that the minority candidates aren't doing so well on this particular predictor. Well, is it necessarily the predictor that's bad, or could it be your sourcing choice that was bad to begin with? Maybe the university is just not doing their job in adequately educating their students. So you want to find a different source. If you find that sourcing is not your problem, you don't necessarily have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Find out what's going on with your predictor. Sometimes it might be an age thing. Someone may have created a test, they're an older generation, and they're using terms that are no longer relevant, perhaps, to a younger generation, or in this case, maybe vice versa, if you're getting an adverse impact to an older population. So sometimes just careful examination of the tool can help you with that. The end of the day, my bottom line point here is that don't give up your quality because you're having maybe some trouble with your predictor. Either find a new predictor that doesn't have an adverse impact situation, or figure out what is wrong with the current predictor. Another decision tool that we make is around utility. And there are two components here. First of all, the utility of the predictor. Does it actually prove to be warranted as a tool? Do we get successful hires because we've used this tool? And we look at a couple of different things here. We look at the selection ratio. Now, that is the number of people hired versus the number of applicants. The lower number is better. In other words, does this predictor really kind of weed out all the bad apples, or all of the non-qualified individuals? Is it really good at helping narrowing down the field to where I get the top candidates? Also, the base rate. The base rate is when you use the predictor and you say, look, here are my current employees. Here are the current employees that are really good. And here is a predictor that really aligns up with my good employees. Again, in this case, a higher number is advantageous. You want a predictor that basically says, all my good employees, they score really well. And for example, if you had salespeople, I would expect that all your great salespeople would probably score pretty high on an extroversion personality factor. So you want to find those things, find those predictors that do well with your current base, and then use those to help screen out your new candidates. Obviously, from a utility perspective too, we're also going to look at the return on investment. So if we're paying $100 for a drug test, maybe a medical test, whatever it is, is that investment worth it in the long run? So let's look first of all at this hiring success component of all. And here you have what's called a Taylor-Russell table before you. So first of all, let's look at our base rate here. Base rate of 0.3. It's relatively low, not great, but we can still use that. What if we say we've got a selection ratio here of 0.10? That means, again, that this predictor really weeds out a lot of candidates in our hiring process. So that's relatively high. We like that. And if we can get a predictor with a high validity factor, in this case 0.6, which is great, look at our utility of this predictor then. 77%. That's pretty good. You would like that. Now look what happens if we jump our base rate to something that's relatively high, in this case 0.8. Now we get a selection ratio that's also high and a validity factor also very high. Look at our success rate with that. In this case, 99%. Here's this bottom line again when we're making decisions. Let's go by facts. Let's throw away our emotions, our gut instincts. We like to do that, but so often, just like the late dating process, right? You think that first date is great, it's wonderful. By the third date, you're thinking, oh no. Same thing with hiring process. Sometimes we think we've got a wonderful candidate, but then by the third month, we're thinking, what did I do? Using these solid assessment tools can really help you make better decisions. Is it worth it financially? Now here you've got a pretty complicated formula, and to be quite honest, I've never been in an organization, and I've worked for several Fortune 100 organizations that I've known to use any kind of formula as this. But all organizations certainly do look at the cost of the predictors that they're using and determine whether they're worth it. And they look at several factors. How many people am I hiring? If I'm hiring 100 people to do janitorial work, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of money on predictors because I know there's high turnover. There's the job functions don't require maybe sophisticated skills and competencies for that. So I'm just not going to spend a lot of money. Versus if I'm hiring an executive for my organization, I'm really going to take the time and energy to do these predictors, to spend the money to make sure that I get the best leader that I can for our organization, because obviously the economic impact is bad. Now again, even this formula has limitations to it. Doesn't look at, adverse impact, EEO concerns, applicant reactions to that. So you need to have some common sense when you're making these decisions.